William Beer is the director of PwC's cyber security practice, and he joins me now. Thanks very much for being here today. Are there more of these than there have been? Are they getting better? Are the hackers getting better? Are they more high profile? Or are we just hearing about them sooner?
Well, without a doubt, there's been a lot of media focus on these type of attacks, and that's one of the reasons we're seeing more and more evidence of the attacks in the press, on television. But I think it's also very important to point out that a lot of these attacks actually go undetected, and a lot of organizations aren't even aware that they've been attacked.
And what is the prime reason for the attacks? Is it possible to put them into categories? Is there one main reason? I mean, is it simply fraud, people trying to get hold of money?
That's a great question. There's probably about 4 different categories that we tend to see. The first one is fraud, so it's people after money, and often the banks are a target. The second is intellectual property. A lot of organizations obviously possess a lot of very important and sensitive intellectual property. The third is around terrorism or activism, and the final category would be warfare. So generally speaking, about 4 different categories.
Right. Now, I'd like to come on to the latter two in a minute, because they sound relatively terrifying. But first of all, the ones that we're seeing a lot of at the moment, the hacking for information. Have companies and organizations become too lax? Was the recession a reason not to increase those security budgets?
Well, based on some of the research that we recently conducted in PwC, we actually saw that a lot of security budgets were deferred because of the recession. But there is a big and strong sense of optimism now that the recession hopefully is trying to close, that those budgets will be released and that spending will increase.
And when you see the kind of publicity that we have seen recently, does that make companies, big and small, and all sorts of organizations suddenly think, wow, where is that plan? Why haven't we updated it? What more can we do?
There's definitely been a change in terms of the level of interest from senior business executives, which we think is extremely positive. So we're seeing more and more senior business executives probing, asking difficult questions, and really challenging their security functions to understand if they're doing the right thing, at the right time, at the right place.
Now, how difficult is it to stay one step ahead of the hackers? Because presumably for every new system you put in place, somebody somewhere is trying to get around it.
Absolutely, and I think that a lot of people tend to think that additional regulation or legislation will assist. Well, we believe that will help and can support. I think we also need to be very careful, because too much regulation or too much legislation can actually slow down the security teams. And when you consider that the organized criminals or the attackers aren't regulated and oftentimes aren't subject to that legislation, or at least try not to be, that makes them much quicker and much faster. So we need to stay at the same speed.
Now, you did mention the terrorist threat. Tell me a little bit more about that and how real it is.
I think what we will see, and maybe some of it is still relatively futuristic, but what we will see is that organizations will look at disrupting maybe some of our critical national infrastructure using cyber methods to render a terrorist attack maybe even more difficult or maybe more serious. And an example here might be they could shut down the emergency telephone systems, they could shut down communication systems, they could shut down the power grid. And by shutting down some of those emergency systems that support the infrastructure of a country, a small or other terrorist attack would obviously be rendered much more complex to resolve.
So really the overall message is that everyone must be vigilant about this, and companies and organizations in particular should be right on top of it.
I think that's key. Everyone needs to be more aware of how their own behavior can actually negatively impact the organizations they work for.
Okay. William Beer, thank you very much indeed for
Thank you.
joining us.